Hey guys, how you doing? Runs a Nut here. Hey, you guys new into water cooling? Is this something you've been thinking about doing but just been afraid to get your feet wet? No pun intended. Well, what I've got here is a kit. This is a Larkooler SkyWater 330. This is a complete water cooling kit for your CPU block. So if you've never done it before, this might be the kit for you. Our friends over at Performance PCs happen to have this one come in. It's very reasonably priced, about the same price as an all-in-one unit like from Corsair, the H100i. And so, but it gives you the opportunity to actually get familiar with and put together your own custom water cooling loop in your system. Now, Larkooler is a company that was formed in 2009 by GBC International. It's a Taiwan-based company that's been around much longer than that. But basically, you know, they created this PC cooling products company to be able to get kits like this together. You know, it has the pump, has the radiator, the fans, the tubing, the fittings, the reservoir, you name it, everything you would need. So I'm curious to see how well it performs and how easy it is to assemble. So what I'm going to do is take you through, look at all the pieces in the kit, explain a little bit about them, and then I'm going to put them together, and then I'm going to go ahead and test them in the system. And then we'll compare that against like all-in-one closed loop systems like the H100i, just to see how well they perform. You know, so if they're about the same price and you're willing to give it a try, maybe this is the kit for you. So let's have a look. Now, first up, having a look at the outside of the packaging, we have the Larkooler SkyWater 330 PC liquid cooling system. Identifies that it's compatible with basically all of the chipsets that are out there now. You know, everything from Intel's LGA 2011 all the way down to even a few generations ago down to the 775, and then AMD sockets covers all of them that have been out for quite some time now. Now on the bottom here you have some little feature icons. They show that it's upgradable, an upgrade option. That's great. That it's silent. The pump reservoir setup is variable. It's got a variable adjust on the for the pump. That their water block for the CPU is high performance, 240 millimeter rad, and 3/8 inch tubing. And as you can see on the front of the packaging, it's everything that you need. Everything from the radiator with fittings to the fans, some coolant, a pump reservoir combo setup it looks like, a CPU block with all the required bracketry to install it, and then tubing and clamps for your tubing. So, and then down the bottom left is a little diagram of a simple setup. This does show the radiator being mounted externally. Well, here we have a shot of the back of the box. Again, it goes into a little bit more detail to describe each of the features, but the pictures are interesting here. The pictures you see of a CPU block installed on it. Then it talks about the reservoir with a waterfall effect. So that's going to be interesting to see that that waterfall effect in the res. And something you rarely see, you don't usually see this, is you see this kit includes brackets for mounting this rad on the back of your case if you want to do that. So that's going to be interesting. And we have all of the piece parts to install the rad and the CPU block. Then the fabrication of the block, how it's designed, is microstructures for the water block to help it cool. And then that the pump has a variable speed, even has a variable adapter that you can adjust. And then the radiator talks about aluminum fin and copper tubes. And then of course all these things together give you a complete water cooling system. Real quick before we take a close-up look at each of the individual parts, I just have to say that's a tremendous amount of material to fit inside of that box. Larkooler did a great job of packaging it. Each item had its own compartment. The coolant was well protected, the reservoir, the pump, the radiator, the fans, everything was well protected. Basically there's a cardboard caddy system that all of those pieces fit into. So you know, if you're buying this or shipping it or using it as a gift, the packaging this comes in is just great. I just was surprised by how well and how much fit into that box. So now let's have a close-up look at each of the individual pieces. All right, let's have a look at the manual, both in English and in Chinese. Breaks down installation of each of the key pieces of the cooling system assembly. listing of all the parts, illustrations of all the parts, and a lot of exploded views. I love exploded views. Very helpful. So manual looks promising. We'll find out as we go to put it together. All right, the first piece of the kit we'll look at is the kit of parts that came with the CPU water block. Here we have a retention bracket. Looks like this is for AMD. This is an Intel backplate retention bracket for the CPU water block. Got a couple of tools here, an Allen wrench and a wrench, some thermal interface material, and a paddle to spread it. 4 screws, some nylon washers, and then a kit of mounting hardware depending on which CPU block LGA that you're going to be mounting using. It also has the clamps that you would use for your barbs to secure the tubing to the water block. Now the water block itself is pretty cool looking. It is hefty. Looks like it's got a nickel finish on here, and it is pretty solid. The Larkooler logo is raised, and this is a textured kind of finish on the top here. It's pretty cool looking. I really like that. Now you can see on here, it looks like these, I believe they must be able to be unscrewed. I tried to unscrew them already hand by hand, and they won't come out, so I'm not going to try to do that right now. But these are barbed fittings already pre-mounted for you into the block. And for those of you who are new to water cooling, there's basically 2 types of systems to attach hosing your tube to for your water cooling loop. It's either barbed, which is what you see here, or compression type fittings. The barbed ones allow you to slide the tubing over top of the barb, and then you secure it with the clamp that they have there. So typically they're less expensive than compression fittings. Compression fittings have more material. There's basically a cap that in a threaded piece here that they'll screw together, and the compression compresses the tubing to the fitting. So those are, but there are still barbs underneath the compression fitting. It's just that you secure it with the other piece and not with a clamp, basically. All right, so let's have a look now at some of the other pieces of the system. The next kit of parts I want to show you is basically pieces related to both mounting the radiator to the case and also powering the fans and testing your loop. Now I'll start with the one of the probably the most important piece in here is this this jumper connector here. This basically is a 24-pin adapter that allows you to plug into your power supply connector, and it's jumpered in the right spot that allows you to turn on your power supply without it having to be connected to your motherboard. So that way you can power your pump and get it working, and the rest of your system is not energized, so you can test your loop out. That way if you have leaks or something, you're not going to fry anything. So this is a very good tool to have, and you should have it if you need it for troubleshooting, and certainly as well as you know, being able to energize your pump and not the rest of your system. So that is the you know, 24-pin loopback connector for testing. We have here some Velcro to be able to mount your pump. We have 2 barbs, and by the way, this is a wrench for those barbs, and just to confirm on the CPU block, they can be removed. This wrench right here slides onto the barb fittings, and they're just really tight on the CPU block. So 2 barbs that'll go into the radiator, the wrench for them, some clamps for your tubing. Then we have here 2 sets of 3-pin to 4-pin Molex connectors that allow you to connect your fans up and or also I believe also to power the pump. So these are some power connections to connect to your power supply cables to both power your fans and the pump. Then we have here a pass-through bracket, so this goes on your PCI block, especially if you're bringing tubing and cablings out the back of your case. This bracket helps organize that. And then we have here the hardware related to mounting the fans. So there's 8 screws to mount the 2 fans. And then there's mounting hardware, and these are the brackets that you can use to mount your radiator off the back of your case. So this is the hardware and the brackets required to do that. So next up in the kit we have 3/8 inch tubing, 1.6 meters of it, basically about 10 feet. we have a cool little funnel to be able to fill your res with. And then coolant. This is Larkooler's coolant. Basically, it is right there. It is water and propylene glycol. So it's 500 milliliters. And the anti-freezing is good down to 5 degrees C. And then, of course, the cautions, you're not going to want to drink or do anything with it other than use it in your cooling loop. And the tubing looks pretty good. Pretty decent diameter and wall thickness. So let's see what's up next. Now in the kit here we have a couple 120 millimeter fans. These fans are 3-pin fans. The leads are about 15 inches long, and the airflow in them is 62.7 CFM. The noise rating on this is 31 dB, and the max RPM on their 1800 RPM fan. So they spin up pretty good. We'll actually hear them and see what they look like. They are all one molded piece, and they're black, or smoke, really, a smoke construction. You can actually see through them. And then what I notice right here is looks like we have an LED in them, so they also light up. So that'll be interesting to see. And then they also provide a couple of fan grills, whether you mount them inside your case or especially if you mount them outside your case. You would want to have some fan grills protecting the open blades. So, all right, now what we have left is the pump and the rad. Let's have a look at the pump. Now here we have the pump. The overall, this is a pump reservoir combo basically, and the overall dimensions for the pump and the reservoir together, it's about 5.5 inches long to the end of the pump. It's about 2.5 inches wide by about 3 inches tall. So that's the dimensions of the space that you're going to need to accommodate. The tube diameter, as we said, is 3/8 inch. These fittings are already installed here with a plug. And again, all of these holes are standard G-quarter fitting holes. The weight's 197 grams. The voltage is rated at 12 volts DC at 0.41 to approximately 1.515 amps. Pump speed is 3,600 to 5,700 RPM. The flow rate is 480 liters per hour. The max water lift is 400 centimeters, and this tank capacity is 250 mils. All right, and then the LED, there is a LED lead here, and the LED is white. And then the pump is a variable pump, and you can adjust it, as I mentioned, anywhere between 3,600 RPM to 5,700. And then here's your main power lead here to the pump. And last up here we have the radiator. The radiator's dimensions are 302 millimeters long by 124 millimeters wide by 35 millimeters thick. Now it's got the Larkooler logo on both sides. See Larkooler? The radiator has got copper tubes with aluminum fins, and I measured the fins. There's about 14 fins per inch on this rad. I really do like the way they skinned it. It weighs about 700 grams. It's pretty hefty. It feels good in my hand. And one of the things to note, though, there's only one set of G-quarter fittings right here, so it's right at the end. So you're limited to bringing them out only from the end here. So if you're going to mount it in your case, you got to make sure you accommodate it for that, or you can mount it on the outside of your case. But most cases you can make arrangements to fit a rad of this size in there without too much problem. All right, now guys, let's see about putting all of this together and seeing how well it performs. The proof will be in how easy it is to install, especially if it's your first time doing it. You want it to be pretty straightforward, and then see how well it cools. So let's do it. All right, first things up, we're going to prepare to install the backplate for the LGA 1150. That's the Haswell CPU Intel chips. So we're going to need only the pieces to install that. So the pieces that are out here are all the kit parts that came for installing backplates and the block to your motherboard, but certain ones are not required because they are not for the LGA 1150 that we're going to do. So Again, this is an LGA 1150 chipset install, so we don't need this. This is an AMD bracket. This is only used for installing an AMD chip, so we're taking that out and putting that away. Next up we're going to remove is these posts that look like this. These are for LGA 2011. So these actually screw right into the bracket that's built onto any LGA 2011 motherboard. So these four are not needed for this install. We'll get rid of those. Now that leaves us with obviously the water block. This is an Intel bracket. This bracket, I believe, may also be used in some AMD installs. But screws, plastic washers, these are called bolt caps, and then these are bolt bases. Then we have the thermal compound that we're going to spread onto the CPU, and they even give you a spreader for spreading it onto the CPU. Now we're going to install this exactly per the instructions, so bear that in mind when it comes to applying thermal interface material. There are many different ways to do it, but we're going to follow the directions exactly. Alright, so what we're going to do now is prep this back plate properly. So one of the things to note is, depending on the chipset, for the LGA 1150, this piece right here, this foam piece that's in the middle of the back plate, gets removed. So for our install, we're going to remove that foam piece. Next up, we have to install these screws through this back plate from the back of the motherboard up through the motherboard, so that we can then put these plastic washers and these bolt caps and these bases on to secure the whole mechanism to the motherboard, so that we can then mount the block. Now, one of the things that we need to do is to put those screws through. There are a set of three, this one you can probably see best, there are a set of three holes to be able to put the screws through. Now that depends on which chip that you're going to use. Now for the 1150, you're going to use this center one right here. So what I'm going to do is, I have this hex key that absolutely happens to be small enough. I'm going to push out. There's foam inside of those holes. It's the way they stamp it out. So we don't need it in the center one, because that's what I'm going to use. So you may want to do what I'm doing, is I'm just pushing that one through, and I'm leaving the holes filled for the other ones that I don't need. So this way, I really can't make a mistake when it comes to putting the screw through there. So again, I'm just pushing the tool through and removing the foam that's inside that one hole. All right. Okay. So now I've removed the foam that was in each of those particular holes, and clean off the table here. So I have the back plate ready for that. Next up, I'm going to get out the screws, and it'll be easier to show you here on the tabletop how this goes together, and then I will actually show you as I mount it to the motherboard how this goes here. So alright, so this plate is going to go on the back of the motherboard with this foam material touching the back of the motherboard. Now I'm going to put up right now a shot of the back plane from behind the motherboard, so you can see that this actually is going to cover a bracket that's on all of the LGA 1150 CPUs. So it's the Intel stock backplane that holds down the chip hold down mechanism for your chip. Now on there you'll see there's a metal bracket, and it has little holes that actually line up like this, and then there also typically will be some space, some IC circuitry that you'll see in the middle there. So this is going to go right over that, and so this is going to go over that right up against the back of the motherboard. And then what will happen is we're going to put through the screw through the back of the plate like this, and you can see I've got it now pretty much flush up against it. There is a little bit of a shoulder on it, and you want to make sure that it's inside here, otherwise the screw is going to spin when you tighten it down. So when you do that, now you'll push this whole block on, the motherboard will be here, and then over the top, once you get the motherboard, you'll slide this plastic washer on it. Then you're going to screw down this bolt cap to it. So, and what this does, this then tightens the bracket and this bolt and holds it tight to the motherboard. So let's see, the motherboard will be on there in that space. And then when all is said and done, after we mount the CPU on here, and of course all four corners will be done, then you're going to have this bolt base that's going to screw down on top and secure it to the motherboard, to the CPU. So what I'm going to do now is I'll actually install it, and I'll show you some of the key shots as I do it so that you can do it too. So just follow along. Alright, so first thing I'm going to do is put the screws through the base. Alright, so I have the 4 screws through the base. All of them are flush up flat. Next I'm going to show you a shot of the back of the motherboard and how I line this piece up. Now here we have the back of the motherboard, and you'll see that there are 4 holes. Those are the holes that the bracket, the back plate, will be mounted through. Now the other thing that I mentioned to you was these 3 points, these 3 holes in the back plate, and you'll notice there are 3 screws on the retention bracket that's come stock with the LG 1150 stock CPU hold on. Now that stays on there, you don't remove that, but what will happen is this bracket will be installed right over that in the same manner. So if you look at those 3 holes, you just line them up with those, and what we're going to do now is I'm going to install the bracket so it goes right through those. Now if you put the screws in the right holes in the bracket there, they'll go right through without any problem. So you can see now we have the back plate mounted onto the back of the motherboard. So now what I'm going to do next is turn it around and show you installing the bolt caps and the bolt base with the washers onto the front of it. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and first mount the washer. And what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to install one first, because right now that plate, and since this is a little bit more difficult since I have it inside the case, but this case has got enough room, I'm holding the plate from behind the motherboard. I have the washer, the plastic washer on. Now what I'm doing is putting the bolt cap on this particular bolt here and screwing it down to the motherboard. So once I have one on there, I'm just going to do the exact same thing to the other 3. Again, this is to provide the retention for the back plate to keep it onto the motherboard. Alright, so there you have one installed. Okay, I have the post through washers at the bottom, and then the bolt caps on each of them. Now you do not use a wrench or a tool, you just tighten these up finger tight. You get them nice and snug and tight, and that's all you need to do. And the other thing was to make sure that the bolts or the screws on the other side are flush with the back plate. So there we have the bolts through and the back plate mounted. Now the next thing to do is we're going to apply thermal paste onto the CPU. Now before we install thermal paste onto the CPU chip, you got to make sure that the chip is clean. Now since I had the H100i on here, I installed that with the thermal paste that comes from Corsair that's already mounted on the bottom of that block. So I removed it, and what I did is I cleaned it with a lint-free towel and some isopropyl alcohol, pure, 99.9% pure alcohol. So that's what I use to clean it off with. Now you can go a step further if you like. There are aftermarket products that you can buy by Arctic Clean. This is another type of thermal interface material remover, which I normally use alcohol first, and then I use this, a couple of drops and a lint-free cloth to clean it off, and then you have step 2 is you put this purifier. You put a few more drops on it, and then you wipe it off with, again, a lint-free cloth. Now these are available at Performance PCs if you want to buy them. You don't have to, though. You don't have to buy them. I just been using it for a long time. So, but they don't come with the kit. Neither does alcohol. The alcohol you have to provide yourself anyway. So, all right. So you clean the CPU nicely and you get it all ready. And then, in order to apply this, you'll notice there's a, I don't know if you can see it, but the tip, there's a little area, like, you know, when you put writing on cakes and those kind of tubes, there's a pointy tip. Well, there's one here. So I'm going to cut that, and then I'm going to squeeze out the interface material, thermal interface material. I'm going to put it right on the CPU. All right, now I'm going to squeeze it out. All right, so I've got a blob on there. And now with the spreader that they provide, I'm going to spread this across the face of the CPU. Now if you look online, and I even have a video of how to spread thermal paste, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a link up in the description. I think it might be a YouTube video, so I'll put the link up here, and it shows all the different ways that you can spread thermal material, and they did it using a plastic sheet, so it shows you actually once the pressure of the hold down device, in this case the CPU block that goes on top of it, once that's applied, you'll see if you use the P method or the line method or crisscross or whatever, you will see how it spreads. So again, I'm just following this method. I traditionally use the P or the line method, but I'm going to do it the way they have it on here, and I probably applied a little too much, but I'm going to wipe that off. So I'm just going to get a nice thin coat across the whole CPU, and any excess I'm going to wipe off this pad. I'm getting rid of that. So I think that's it right now. Alright, so we have the thermal interface material applied, and next up is installing the block. Now to install the block, I have it right here, and let me back it off so you can see. I want to install it so it looks cool, and the way you'd look at it through the window of this case is like this. So that's the way it's going to go on. But first I need to remove the plastic material protecting the base. Now I could use alcohol and I could use cleaner, but this is just stuck on. It's just plastic. So this is a beautiful shiny mirrored surface, and I have not touched it. My fingerprint, my oils from my hand are not on here, so I'm just going to go ahead and put this on. Lay it right on top of here. Alright, so It's been placed on there now. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to use these, they called it bolt bases, and this is what it looks like. That's a bolt base. And I'm going to screw them on. First I'm just going to get them nice and flush with the top of the plate. I'm not going to tighten them down yet. Okay, now that they're all down, I'm going to do in a star fashion. I'm going to do like 5 turns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to crisscross. 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, whatever you do, you know, you can do 5. You can do fewer. I probably wouldn't do too many. Just you want to make sure you get even pressure applied to all points on this. So I'm going to go back and do about another 5 here. 5 there. I'm just going to keep on going until until it can't go any more. So what that's doing is it's holding down. These plates here are bending now and keeping the contact with the block and the chip, spreading the thermal interface, making sure there's good contact. So basically that's all I'm doing right now. Now I'm nearing the end. I can only do about 1 turn each. Alright, so there we have it. Mounted the back plate to the motherboard, and then we applied the thermal paste, peeled off the protective layer of plastic from the bottom of the CPU block, and then put it on top, lined it up, and then put the bolt bases, or the bolts on, the nuts if you want, thumb nuts, and did them in a star or crisscross fashion. So you don't want to do one side and then the other, you want to crisscross. Alright, so there we have the CPU block installed. Now that we have completed the assembly of the CPU block onto the motherboard and the chip, what we're going to do now is mount the fans onto the radiator. So in order to do that, we need a few things. First, what we're going to do is, just in case, to make it a little easier, it's not so bulky to maneuver, we're actually going to go ahead and mount the barbs to the radiator, and they give you a wrench for it. And just so you can see that there is a little, on the knurled side here, once you thread this in with your fingers first, there are 2 areas on either side of there that you can slide this wrench perfectly in there to get it nice and tight. You want to have a good seal. You notice there's an O-ring on here. You want to have that secured snugly to the edge of the radiator so you don't get a leak from this point. So here we have the places where the barbs will go. So what I'm going to do is just simply screw it in by hand first on this one. Get it as tight as I can with my fingers. And then when I can't tighten it anymore, I'm going to take the wrench and tighten it the rest of the way. Until you pretty much can't, you know, you don't want to go crazy. It is aluminum, but that's pretty damn tight, and I can see the O-rings sandwiched really well. So I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Take the other barb and screw it on. Finger tight as best I can, and then after that take the wrench and tighten it the rest of the way. So now that we have the barbs on there nice and tight to the radiator, what I'm going to do now is take the fans. Now the fans have a direction that the air blows through. If you're not familiar with them, typically, I mean, it's always the side that the motor mounts to is where the air comes through. So the open side where you can put your fingers through very easily, the blades, is where air will come in and then come through or blow out on the other side. And most fans have an orientation. I don't know if you can see it in the light here, but there is an arrow that indicates the airflow, and then another arrow that indicates the blade rotation. Okay, so and then what I like to do is I like to mount the fans. They are 4 holes that line up right with the fan size. I like to line up the cables on the fans to be right next to each other, so that way when you go to dress them and connect them to your power, you're dealing with the same cable lengths on both fans, so they'll go to the same space. And in this kit they provide you a cable connectors to connect to these. So if they don't reach your motherboard, especially since this is going to be mounted on the outside of the case, it's highly unlikely this is going to reach a motherboard header, so I'm going to have to use that other cable. So it makes it nice and easy to be able to dress them. Now also we have these nice fan grills, which we're going to put on. Alright, now I just lined them up, I eyeballed them, and when we get the screws out here now, this is where we'll actually get them going. So we have 8 screws, 4 for each fan, and I'll just start with one. All I'm doing right now is just getting one started across from each other on the fan so that they are lined up. Alright, so we have the fans assembled onto the radiator. Now the way this radiator is going to be mounted is vertically, so you'll be able to see the Larkooler logo. And we have the fan power coming off at the same point here. Alright, so the next thing to do is prep the case for mounting the radiator brackets. Alright, well now that we have the radiator and the fans with the fan grill assembled, the next thing to do is to show you how to mount the radiator and fan assembly to the case. Now the sequence actually is, these are brackets that are needed, and you will mount these to your case first and then mount the radiator assembly. However, it would be easier here on the bench to show you how these will mount to the radiator. So basically what will happen is these 4 bolt caps are what will allow you to mount the radiator to these brackets. So you'll see these holes on the brackets. These 2 center ones line up with the center mounting points on this radiator. So these are, of course, 4 of them for each fan, but for the brackets they use the 2 in the center to be able to secure them to the bracket. And so you would take this bolt cap, and then you would screw it through in both of those places to secure it to the radiator. So they give you 4 bolt caps right here, and you have 2 on this side on this bracket and 2 on this one. But we're going to install those after we have these brackets mounted to the case. Now in order to mount the brackets to the case, you have these there's 8 screws and 4 bolt bases, and basically what will happen is you're going to use these 2 holes, these 2 and these 2 on this side, to mount these around the exhaust fan spot in the back of your case. So you're going to have these 2, and I'll show you that on camera here in a minute, but that's how they'll be arranged. And what will happen is you're going to take a screw and you'll put it through here. Then you're going to screw this bolt base on here, kind of like we did for mounting the CPU block. What we did is we take and put these through here. So this will be kind of stood off from the case. So the back of the case, you're going to put these up against where the fan hole is, and then coming through the fan hole you're going to take another screw and screw it in here, so that'll hold the bracket to the case. So the mounting place for these brackets are actually right here, right around this 120 millimeter exhaust fan on the rear of the Leon Lee PC D600 case. So most all cases have at least a 120, and many have spots for a 120 and 140, but you're going to be using the 120 mounts on the back of your case. So I am now going to remove these screws from this fan. Okay, now that we have the fan removed, I can now easily mount this onto the back of the case, and probably be easier to see. Alright, I have the camera arranged now so you can see the edge of the case. I have removed that fan, and what I'm going to do is, using the screws that I showed you before, this screw right here and the bracket with the same screw and the bolt base through there, I'm going to put a screw through one of the mounting points here, and then align this up. Again, I leave a little bit loose, and then I take the last screw and then I secure this one exactly the same way. Alright, next up is actually mounting the radiator now onto that bracket. Alright, we have the radiator assembly ready here. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to mount them onto the rad here. So this is how it's going to mount, and they're going to be secured using the bolt caps that I showed you before. So we're going to take this one right here and feed it through, and then use it. And this is just a thumb screw. This, they call it a bolt cap. All I'm going to do is, as long as I have it lined up, get a grip on it. That's one. I'll do the same on the other side for the top one. Here's a better shot of the thumb screw going into the radiator. And again, these just should do finger tight. Now these brackets are pretty sturdy. You can actually probably lift this whole case, yeah. And that's just pushing off the bottom of that bracket. Alright, we have the radiator now installed. Alright, next up what we're going to do is connect the power for these fans. Now one thing to note, that if for a permanent installation, and if I wasn't videotaping this from my system, I would put these cables on the other side. I'd orient the fans so that the power cables are coming down in the middle of the case, so you don't see them looking from the side. But for the video, I want to do it here so you can see everything. So I've got two power cables from the fans, and in the kit you're going to get, there's a power adapter cable that has two connectors, two fan connector headers, and one Molex at the other end. So this is the cable that you need to connect up and power your fans. And then inside of the case, I'm going to go ahead and plug in the adapter cable. And then I'm going to run this Molex cable through this grommet in the case so that I can connect it to a Molex power cable on the other side of my cable management side of this case. So I'm just going to poke it through, and I'll connect that up when I get to the other side. Okay, now we're coming to the point where we need to arrange to install the pump and connect its power. And so what we have here now is the full pump reservoir assembly. And on the pump reservoir assembly we have power connections. There is a 3-pin power connection. We have the RPM adjuster for the pump, and then we have an LED, 12 volt LED adapter cable. So let's get the power connected up first. So what we're going to do is we have two 3-pin adapters, very much like the ones we use for the fan. We're going to plug one into here. We'll plug the 12 volt LED one into the other. And so we have the power connector, and then what we're going to do is we're going to run one to your Molex power for your pump to your off your power supply, and then this is an RPM signal cable that we can run to any header on the motherboard. So what I'm going to do is kind of split these. I'm going to push one through to the back of the case where we're going to connect up the power. And then I'm going to I have a motherboard fan header right here. So I'm going to go ahead and plug it into that. Alright, so now that we have the power supply, power cable arrangements done, the next thing to do is to find a mounting point for it. Now, they provide Velcro, double-sided sticky tape, so that you can tape it to the bottom of your case, and it will provide some dampening of the motor vibration, because it'll sit on the and it'll also keep it in place. Now I'm going to place it right back here in this portion of this case, which is just perfect for it. So I've got the pump reservoir ready here to go, plenty of access to fill it. This is the fill port on the pump. This is the return, and then this is the outflow, so where the pump is going to be pumping the coolant out of it and taking you through the planned flow. It'll come out of the pump, go into the CPU block, come out of the block, go out of the case through one of my grommet holes here, and then connect to one of the ports on the bottom of the radiator, come out of another port, and then come back through, and then it will return into this port here on the reservoir. Now you could also, there's another place here for a return if you needed it. So if your case or where you positioned your pump reservoir was up higher and that made more sense, then you can certainly use that. And you could actually use the fill port too, but if you do that, it bypasses the cool waterfall action, so it would go right into the container. So you could use that as a fill, though that's not the way they intended it, but you could do that. But anyway, so we have the pump now oriented in here. We have the power connections ready to go. Now what we need to do is get this tubing, and we need to then dress the tubing and connect it in the loop that I just described. So let me get some tools out here for cutting the tubing, and then we'll get started here tubing it up. So the trick to getting your tubing after you've put your clamp on it over the barb is to get it moistened. And here's just the some coolant. Get some coolant on it, and you can leak it over the barb. So get it just moistened a little bit, and your tubing will slide on it much easily, very easily, much more easy than if you just did it dry. So you can see it slid on there very well, and then what you do is you take your clamp, squeeze it, and there you have it secured to your barb. And then that's what you're going to do for each of the connection points in your loop. So going to the barb on your CPU cooler and on the rad, and then back to the pump reservoir here. That's how you will secure them. So okay, so now that we know how to put tubing onto the barb with our clamp, I'm going to go ahead and connect the tubing up. Now I'm just going to go backwards in the loop. This is the return into the reservoir. So I've already got that connected up. So what I'm going to do now is run it so it comes from to the bottom of this port on the radiator. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and dress this so I have an idea of how long it will be. And then what I'm going to do is just mark it with my finger here. Now you can cut tubing with scissors, but it has to be very, very sharp scissors. You want a nice clean cut. So if you can get these at Home Depot, or you can get tubing cutters. And they're designed to cut plastic tubing. So that's what I have here. My scissors there are cheap and they're not good, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut it there. So you see we have a nice clean cut. It's pretty flat. That's what you're looking for. And then what I'm going to do is run it through this bottom grommet hole. And then before I put it on my barb, I'm going to put my clamp on here. And then I do want to get it moistened up so the tubing slides on there fairly easy. Alright, so with that in there, I just slide my tube up. And then I pinch my clamp to secure it. So I have the tube here through. I don't have the Velcro stuck to it yet. Once I have everything run, then I'll tighten it down here. That's why you see it moving a little bit. So I have one tube run. Now the next one I'm going to take is from the radiator here, and then run it through a grommet hole and into the CPU block. So what I'm going to do here is get a rough idea of how long that is. And I'm going to come back through this one, so roughly, well, not roughly, it's going to be exactly from here and then up to there. So again, and you know, you try to make it as neat as you can. So I've got plenty of loop, probably right about there. So I'm going to cut my tubing. Alright, now I'm going to put some coolant on this barb and then on this barb here, so it slides on easy. And again, don't forget to put your clamp on. I have my clamp. Alright, all the way up, and my grommet came off here, must be. Get another clamp. Alright. And now all I have left is this one going to the output of the pump. Alright, so let me get a little bit, let's measure this. And then it's going to come down. Or how about we start here. And then we come up here. Alright. So all I did is just eyeballed where I wanted it, and I marked it with my fingers. Kind of pinched it. So again, I'm going to get some coolant. Try not to get any on the motherboard, just enough to wet the barb. Alright, and I'm sliding my clamp on here, and then sliding the clamp on the other end. Alright, so I'll put this one on first. You can do whichever one is easiest for you. I just decided to put that one on and squeeze the clamp again, and then slide it on to the barb. Alright, and then the last piece of the run onto the pump. Alright, so we have the tubing run. So again, the flow here is coming out of the pump into the CPU block, out of the CPU block, going into the radiator. The fan's cooling the, taking the coolant, taking the heat out of it by blowing through the radiator, and then returning the coolant back into the reservoir. Now, one bit of advice, you saw I measured carefully the tubing. You want to, measure twice and cut once, because this is all that I had left. So, one thing to note is if your case does not have the pass-throughs, the grommet holes like my case here does, then the SkyWater 330, they do include a bracket for you that would go in your one of your PCI slots that are unused. And you'll notice it's got two large ports there that allow you to perfectly fit through the diameter of this tubing. So you have two, one for each of the tubes that would be exiting and coming back into your case. And there's even a smaller space here for your fan wires. So remember, you have your fan power that's got to come back through your case. So they have thought of that as well. So if your case doesn't accommodate that, the bracket right here into one of your empty unused PCI slots will do it for you. Okay, now we're getting ready to put some coolant in the loop and check the loop for leaks. But before we do that, one of the key things that you need to have is power to power the pump. Now here I have my pump lead from the power for the pump right here, and that's the only thing that I need to energize. I do not want to power anything else up in the system, because if there's a leak and it drips on it, well, then you have your potential for a short or some problems. So all you want to do is be able to power the pump only. So one of the things that the Larkooler kit provides for the SkyWater 330 is this power jumper that I mentioned in the beginning of the review. This is key because what it does, it plugs into your motherboard power connector and it jumpers the particular pins you need to allow the power supply to turn on. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to demonstrate it with just an external power supply. Now you can use, if you don't have an external power supply to power your pump like I do here, you can use the one that's in your system, because what you would do is you would remove the power cable right off your motherboard. You're going to take that out. So basically, if you have only your power supply in your system to do this with, you would remove this from your motherboard. So it would be sticking out just like this. Now, all you need is the 4-pin Molex power to be connected up to your power supply. So what I would recommend, although nothing else on your system would be energized, I would recommend, removing the power from your hard drives, and from, if you have your graphics card installed, remove the power connectors from those, so you have no power. Because once you turn on the power supply, any of the other power connections to that power supply will come on. Of course, it won't be turning on your motherboard because you have that removed from it. Okay, so the key thing is in order to do this, if you have only one power supply, you're going to remove this from your motherboard. And then I would recommend removing the power connections to your other devices, like I said, like your hard drives and your graphics card. Just disconnect those so they're not energized, just in case they get water on them as well. Okay? So here we go. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to show you, without connecting anything up, how the power supply can come on. So I've got the adapter plugged into this power supply. I have this power cable in, and it's connected to a live outlet. And I guess the best way to see this, I don't know if you'll see it on this here, because this power supply fan will only come on if it's needed, but I'm going to go ahead and turn the switch on. I have the jumper connected in, and I'm going to turn the switch on. And there we go. So you got the fan going. So you can see that this power supply is turned on now. Now it's not feeding anything, and the only thing that's allowing that to do that is this jumper. This adapter right here to allow it to come on. So there is power coming out of these connections right now, because they're the only ones that I have connected up. Alright, I'm going to turn it off right now. And then what we will do is this will be connected up to the pump power. But because the pump will come on as soon as there's power energized to it, we first have to make sure that there's coolant in the reservoir. You never want to run a pump in a system without any coolant in it, because that can burn up the pump. So it's just one of the key things that you have is You have to have coolant in your reservoir, and your reservoir is feeding your pump directly. And the way this pump reservoir system is designed, once you put coolant in here, it automatically feeds the pump. So there's no worries. Some other systems or other custom loops, the pump and the reservoir are separate, and you have to make sure that the reservoir is feeding the pump directly. It's the first thing that gets any kind of coolant. All right, now we're about ready to fill the loop, but one of the things we want to do for precautions is, even though there's nothing else is energized, we want to catch any potential leaks or anything. So trusty old paper towel or a very good absorbent cloth. I laid it here, so if we have any leaks coming from these points here, from these barbs, it'll drip down onto the paper towel. We'll see it. Over here I have a towel on this side underneath the barbs for here. So we're good to go there. And then I'll be looking at these connections here. So coming out of the pump and going back into the reservoir, I'll be looking at that. And then here I have the adjustment valve. So right now I'm going to set it on low for right now. I've got this the variable speed adjustment for the pumps right here. So I have that on low. And now what we're going to do is remove the fill port, the plug. Take our nice little funnel. And what I'm going to do right now, I've got nothing powered up. All I'm doing right here now is pouring some coolant into the reservoir. So I'm going to fill it up as far as it will go. I wouldn't fill it until you get to, there's a line right up about here, this top portion of the reservoir. And just keep an eye, so you don't want it backing out through the loop. One of the things that's nice is that it's colored coolant. It's blue, so you'll be able to see that pretty easily if it does drip. If you use clear coolant, you know, obviously you'll be able to feel it and touch it, but blue will be very visible if it comes out anywhere and you're not noticing it right away. Okay, so we have the reservoir filled up. We still have the funnel in to provide some air so that it'll help fill the system up. Now obviously the radiator's got to be full, and then the tube. So what's going to happen is when we power this on, the pump should come on, and what will happen is it'll start pushing coolant up through this portion of the tubing into the CPU block and then through. And what we're going to do is we're going to watch how much coolant gets consumed by the loop, and as it comes down, if it comes down fairly low, we're going to turn this off and add more coolant. So again, you want to keep coolant filled in the reservoir. It doesn't have to be to the very tippity top, but it's got to be filled up enough so that the pump does not run dry. Alright, so we have the power supply here is off. We have the jumper in position. We have all of the tubing connected up. We have some paper towel and key spots and some towel to check for any leaks. Now what I'm going to do is connect up the power lead to the pump, to my power supply connector. Now again, the power supply is not on, but I do have it powered up. That's the only power cable. The Molex connection is the only cable I have connected to this power supply, and we have the power supply jumper in place. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is turn it on, and let's see if you can see some of the coolant level go down here. And I think you can see the whole loop in this shot. So here we go. I'm going to turn the pump on now. Now the pump went pretty quick. Still plenty of coolant in there, so I'm going to turn it on again. Alright, and I turned off the power supply. So what I'm going to do is put some more coolant in the reservoir again. Not too high. I don't do the same thing I did before. I'm going to turn it on again now. Now it hasn't come back through here yet. So it hasn't made it to the return to the pump yet, but you see coolant filling up here. A little bit has come through. So I'm turning it, power supply back on now. And it looks like Get the pump going. I'm going to turn it off and add some more again. And what I'm going to do is adjust the RPM of the pump a little bit higher, like midpoint. Now I'm going to turn it on again. And so now we have a constant flow. And I'm filling some more coolant into the reservoir. So you can see the loop is filled up. And there's a constant flow. So it's coming up through the radiator back down into the reservoir. Now, now it's time to keep an eye out. I'm going to check around the CPU block. There is no leaking at all. Checking around the fittings where I screwed it into the bottom of the radiator, and I don't feel any leaks at all. It's nice and snug. Again, remember, not only could it leak at the tube connection, but also where the fitting was screwed in. So, but nothing there, and then the pump seems fine. There's nothing leaking out of the connections by the pump, and there is just a steady whine of the pump. I hope you heard all that, because I had the microphone connected up by the camera and not on me. So basically we went through and just continue filling and topping off the reservoir, and not letting it go all the way down dry, so you have the pump with no coolant in it, until what it took about 4 or 5 times to turn the power supply on and off, top it off, and now you have the pump providing a steady flow through the loop and back into the reservoir. What I'm going to do right now is turn off the power supply. So what's happening now, oh, I'm going to turn it back on. So with coolant constantly being pumped in the res, we have I guess it goes about 3/4 of the way, and so when I turn off the power supply, there's no more power pushing the coolant through. Then the coolant tends to want to settle. Well, when it does that, it raises the level of the coolant in the reservoir, and then without having a plug in the fill port, we could get overflow again. So I've removed the funnel, and I'm putting the plug in to seal the loop. Now you will hear, if you hear a lot of noise here, it's because there's air in the loop. So you'll hear some of the bubbling going, and it takes a while for a loop to settle and get all the air out. But this is a very short, small loop, closed loop, and seems to be doing just fine. I just want to show you that I have the pump power connector connected up now to my main system's Molex power, and then the fans coming off the radiator are also connected to my main system's power. So you need to connect up to 2 available Molex plugs on your coming off your power supply in order to have the pump and the fan powered from your main system's power. All right. And we have the system running now. Under load at stock settings. You can hear a little bit of the fans. So what I thought would be the best way to do this is to put together a system and use something that's comparable in price and that's popular, like the Corsair H100i, to give you an idea of how well that cools. That's a closed loop system to the SkyWater 330, which is basically a custom, build it yourself water cooling loop. And so what I did is put together a system here. It's based on the Gigabyte Z87X OC4 motherboard that has a i7 4770K chip in there. We have some Crucial Ballistics Tactical Tracer RAM there. That's 16 gigabytes running at 1866. Then we have a Gigabyte GeForce WindForce GTX 660 GPU in there, along with a Corsair AX1200 that's powering it. Now all of that is put inside of a Lion Li PC D600 case, and if you're interested in that, you can take a look at the link in the description and you can take a look at that case in more detail. But other than that, that is the basic test setup that we're going to use to test the performance of the SkyWater 330 as compared, like I said, to this Corsair H100i. In order to give you an idea of the performance capabilities of the SkyWater 330, what I'm going to do is compare it to the Corsair H100i, and what I'm going to do is run OCCT version 4.4.0, and I'm going to run it both at a stock setting at 3.5 volts, and on this motherboard, that 4770K will do it at 1 volt. So that's set in the BIOS, so I'll run it at that. And then what I'm going to do is I'll take the minimum, the idle temps, and I'll also then take the max temps of each of the cores, add them up and average them out, and I'm going to run the CPU impact test for 30 minutes. So I'm going to do that 3 times. I'll let it cool about 15-20 minutes in between, and then I will subtract that from the average ambient temp from each of those runs, and that'll give us a delta T. So like I said, I'm going to do that at stock settings, see how well this thing performs just running regular at the factory settings, and then I'm going to overclock the 4770K to 4.5 gigahertz, but that's going to take 1.2 volts, so that additional voltage is also going to increase the heat, and then we'll do the same thing, 30 minutes, 3 runs, take the the idle temp average and the max temp average, and we'll get the delta T, and to be able to compare the two. And at the end, I'll put a table together. So there you have it, guys. That's the performance of the Larkooler SkyWater 330 as compared to a Corsair H100i. You can see that the differences in the results are basically a half a degree to a degree difference, and that's really in the margin of error. So it's safe to say, in my opinion, that these kits and their cooling capabilities are comparable. So if you've not done custom water cooling loop before, this is a great kit to get started with, so that you can try it yourself. It has all of the elements that you would need if you were to pull one together. Only thing is, Larkooler provides you a complete kit with all of the pieces that you need to do that. You got the res, the pump, the radiator, fans, fan grills, tubing, barbs. You even have brackets to mount it and pass your tubing and your cabling through, and even the coolant and a funnel. I mean, really, it's got everything. About the only thing it doesn't have is a tube cutter. But you can get that for just a couple of dollars at your local hardware store, or a very good pair of sharp scissors. Now, I think it's a good quality components. I especially like the radiator, very nice. The pump and the res, good construction. I didn't see any issues with any of that. Nothing leaked, and the barbs were decent quality, and the CPU block was great. So, about the only thing that I would like to see added to this kit is the capability to be able to mount it in your case. Now, the case that I used, the Lion Li PC D600, has a mount for a 240 millimeter radiator in the roof of it. The only problem is that this radiator has the G-quarter fittings at one end and they come straight out. So in order for me to mount it in this case, I could not do it without having the tubing kink. And of course you can't have that in your loop. So right angle fittings would have been nice. If that could have been included, then you could have either chosen to mount it in your case, or in my case here in this case, or on the outside. But you know, I wanted to install it and test it in the factory configuration just as they provided in the instructions, and that's the same thing I did with the H100i. So, but that's about the only thing that I would say. But you can buy right angle fittings if you want to put them in your case. They're only a few bucks each. You just need two. And the only other thing that you might want to consider upgrading are the fans. You can, if you want to put a set of real premium fans on there, especially if you're going to mount it outside, then you would have a much quieter, and maybe you might find some fans that have a higher static pressure. So you could even eke out a little bit more performance out of this setup. So, but overall, I liked it a lot, and I would recommend it. I think because of the value at $129.99 from Performance PCs, everything that you get in this kit is well worth it. So in my rating here, I will give this 4 Ron's and Nuts out of 5, and it's primarily because of the value and the quality of the pieces in the kit. I didn't find anything that I would toss in there. So that's it, guys. I hope you liked this review. I hope it was meaningful for you. And with Christmas right around the corner, it might be something that you would like to maybe get to one of your friends that hasn't gone into water cooling yet, or maybe buy it for yourself, or pass this video on to your parents and then get them to buy it for you. Anyway, I hope you liked it. If you did, please like and favorite, and if you're so inclined, please subscribe. That's it from Ron's and Nut. Thanks for watching.